We stand here today with heavy and loving hearts for the tragic death of Lonzie Barton. However, we also stand here united in experience and a comprehensive knowledge of the facts and law, and we now accept that this plea was the right thing to do. As the elected state attorney in the 4th Judicial Circuit, I am charged with making some of the most difficult decisions in our community. A few weeks ago, I had to make just such a decision in this case. In my 34 years as a prosecutor, child deaths have been among the most difficult cases that we handle. The decision in this case regarding Lonzie Barton was made after several days of deliberation with many of my closest advisors within this office and in consultation and harmony with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Williams and Chief Hackney, as well as all of the men and women who were the closest to this investigation and the prosecution of this case. After we arrived at this decision, and it wasn't easy, but after we did, there was not a single voice of opposition from any of us who knew all of the facts and all of the law. On July 31st, 2015, a massive search for a beautiful, beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde-haired 2-year-old named Lonzie Barton commenced. This search went on for more than 5 months. It involved hundreds of men and women and thousands of hours, and Sheriff Williams and Director Hackney will give you more detail about that. But as you all know, this child could not be found, and the search had to be suspended. There was only one person who could lead us to Lonzie's grave, just one person who could make sure that Lonzie was recovered from an unmarked, isolated, shallow grave and brought home to his loved ones in a proper resting place. The negotiated disposition that Ruben Ebron entered into this morning was the only way, and I emphasize only way, that we could bring Lonzie Barton home. As many of you have reported, Ruben Ebron and his attorneys approached my prosecutors to attempt to reach a resolution of the case just a few days before it was set for trial last month. Over the next few days, we conducted several meetings, and included in every meeting was this team of police and prosecutors who are charged with the responsibility for seeking justice for Lonzie Barton. Of great importance to all of us throughout the hours and hours of discussion was the recovery of Lonzie's body. Through his attorneys, Mr. Ebron said that this was an accidental death and that Lonzie had drowned in a bathtub inside the apartment that he shared with Lana Barton. He stated that he panicked and hid the child's body off of Phillips Highway and then staged it as an abduction. He expressed that he was remorseful for his actions and that he wanted to take us to the child's body. The version of events provided by the defense in a proffer was consistent with the physical evidence and the extensive knowledge that these detectives had from their hours and hours and days of investigation. They fact-checked every single aspect of the proffer, and we were comfortable when we all set out to follow Ruben Ebron to Lonzie's grave. Baby death cases, as I said, are notoriously difficult. The challenges associated with them are as well. We've had numerous baby deaths in this circuit. Not many of them reach the level of profile with the media and the public that this case has. Not many of the cases throughout the state have ever reached the level of profile and media attention that the Casey Anthony case did. Yet we've agonized over every one of these child deaths. We've agonized over the limitations of facts and law attendant to all of them. We recently tried what we could prove as a first-degree murder case in the death of a baby where there was a mother and the boyfriend. We charged the boyfriend. And one of my colleagues in law enforcement sent us this letter, and I want to quote from the letter that he sent. Child death cases in which more than one adult has access to the victim at the time of injury are notoriously difficult to prosecute. He goes on to say that the complications in that case stemmed from both parties, the biological mother and the boyfriend, lying to his investigators. That could have been a letter to me from Sheriff Williams, because it is so rampant in these cases where there is more than one adult in contact with a child. You know from your own experience from covering the Casey Anthony case that the determinative cause of death was never found as a factual resolution by the jury. Never could be determined. In fact, our prosecutors, our colleagues in Orlando, had to charge alternatively, if you remember. They had to charge first-degree murder as well as the lesser included of culpable negligence. Because once a baby's body is out of the hands of medical experts and a quick examination by the medical examiner, proving the cause of death becomes almost impossible. In the evening hours of January 10th, Mr. Ebron was taken from his jail cell, shackled, placed in a police vehicle with his defense attorneys, with detectives from the sheriff's office, and with our prosecutors, and he led a convoy of vehicles down I-95, onto I-295, ultimately onto Phillips Highway. And then we turned down a long and dark road into a wooded area very close to the expressway. It was in that wooded area that Lonzie Barton's remains were located within 12 hours. Again, I'm going to ask Sheriff Williams and Director Hackney to discuss the area itself and the recovery and the difficulty of the recovery of Lonzie's body. Most importantly, I want to end my comments before I turn it over to Sheriff Williams with the medical examiner's findings. Almost always, the medical examiner is the key in baby death cases. The cause and determination of death, and more importantly, the ability to set a time on the injuries that cause death, is key to 90% of these cases. In this case, our medical examiner, even in consultation with a forensic anthropologist who studied the bones and the remains of Lonzie Barton, could not determine the cause and manner of death. They could, however, detect injuries to the bones of that child, even though not all of the bones were recovered. But from what was recovered, we do know that there were some injuries inflicted during that child's life. They were fractures to his ribs. They were healing fractures, indicating that they had occurred sometime prior to his actual death. It comes to the actual cause. What caused Lonzie Barton to die, and who was responsible for causing those injuries? There is no expert opinion that could help us. Then we were left with the testimony of the only two people who had access to that child on that particular Friday, Ruben Ebron and Lana Barton. And again, I'll remind you of the quote from my colleague: when both parties are lying in the beginning of an investigation, it's virtually impossible to prove. What occurred here is that the one party who knew what happened to this child and where he had buried this child came forward and offered a plea to the charge. And Rich Mantei is here. Where's Rich? Is he still here? I know he has a murder trial he's got to get to in just a few minutes. But Rich can tell you the aspects of the plea and why this was an important finding and seeking of justice in this particular case. I want to ask Sheriff Williams to speak to you now, and then we'll all be available to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Sheriff.
Thank you, Angela. Well, good morning. And as Angela said, I mean, these cases are incredibly challenging. They are emotionally challenging, as you can imagine, and we've all experienced that in the last several months in dealing with this case, but they're also legally challenging. And with all of the facts that we had, the forensic evidence that we had, obviously we felt like that this was the best course of action. Everybody up here, again, as Angela said, agreed to that. And I want to thank Angela and her team. From day one, they have been step by step with us in this case. They know it as well as anybody. And that's the kind of collaboration that we have day to day on all the cases that we work. You don't see that around the state. And I would challenge you to look at other places in the state and find that level of cooperation and collaboration between law enforcement agencies and prosecutors. and we pride ourselves on that. And again, this case was no different. So, I want to thank Angela and her team for that. I want to thank the hard work of my team, obviously led by Chief Tom Hackney. From day one, these men and women just, went to the wall for this case, as they do many cases. But this one really got the attention of the community. The outpouring of support from the community, again, as I've mentioned before, has been overwhelming from the beginning. It continues, obviously, to be, in the spotlight, and I get at least 2 or 3 times a week, people ask me and comment on this. You ask me to comment on it and talk about this case. So, again, I want to thank the community. I want to thank the media, again, for all the attention that this case has gotten as it deserved, and thank my team for all the hard work that they've done on this case in the last several months. So, Angela, I'll turn it back over to you. With that, you want to have... Okay, Rich?
Good morning. Sorry, I do have to kind of get moving. I have a closing argument I'm supposed to be giving in about 15 minutes, so if anybody has anything you really think I can answer for you, let me know.
Mr. Mantei, the big question is, what's going to happen with Wanda Barton now that we're hearing these details that she apparently was involved in Mantei's death?
And I'm not going to discuss what may or may not happen in someone else's case for this one. That's one of those that is sort of to be determined, and it'll have to stay that way. That's a pending... Wanda Barton has a pending case for sentencing here and other pending charges in Baker County, and I'm not going to be jeopardizing anything related to any of those by discussing further matters here in front of you guys.
There were many people that believe Ruben Ebron should have gotten a harsher sentence, a life sentence, and more time. What do you say to those people who think 20 years isn't enough?
20 years isn't enough for what, exactly? Since the evidence allowed us, and the only way that some of this was allowed to be established to file the charges we ultimately ended up filing was through this negotiation. I'm not sure who thinks that they know all that better. What I will say is this: I've heard a couple people sort of say that this is should be a death case or a life sentence, and there is no charge that has been filed or could be filed based on the evidence that would qualify for either one of those. And so that strikes me as a pretty irresponsible statement. I've actually heard some lawyers try and use this case to, and I will say this: this child had enough adults in his short life who failed to do what they should have done by him and did wrong by him and didn't help him. And it is an absolute travesty for me to see now people trying to stand on the bones of this baby and boost themselves up. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. This is not a political mound to stand upon and beat your chest and try and use it for your own benefit. This is a dead child who's brought home with his family. So that's what I got to say to those people.
Well, I would say, that it's such a political matter. The whole community obviously very strongly about the loss of this child, the circumstances of his death, and the life that he led before it ended. I think when people say is 20 years enough, it is to that question, just that clearly something terrible happened to this child in life, and as he died, and is 20 years enough in that respect?
I don't know that if you're going to characterize it like that there's any sentence you could ever say is ever enough for people who do what some people think happened here. Unfortunately, as a prosecutor, I get the great job of only dealing with matters that I can actually prove, and I can prove it through evidence, and I can prove it to a jury. And it's easy to go ahead and speculate about what you might want to think happened, and imagine a scenario where you think this should be a lot stronger and a lot harsher. The problem is you then have to actually go about building a case with evidence and prove it. And if that can't happen, then all the emotion in the world, I think, is better redirected to helping those children that are still out there that still do need help. And I urge the community to continue to do that. I'm glad that if this case does nothing else, it kind of brings awareness that there are children out there who fall through the cracks. So I'll agree with you there. But, as prosecutors, as police, you don't want us running off half-cocked and filing charges and seeking sentences and things that we can't support or the evidence won't establish. Nobody wants that, and that's not what we do.
Mr. Mantei, did Ruben Ebron say what led to his sudden change of course back in January to lead you guys to the body? Was it Wanda Barton's entering of her plea agreement?
You're going to have to ask him that. I'm sorry. I don't know.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mantei's going to have to get to court. You